online advertising enables free content and services on the internet. One of the free services that is powered by advertising is the browser. 60% of web browsing is done through Chrome, which is owned by Google, which is powered by advertising. The application that most of us use to explore the web is made by a company that relies on ads. So it is unsurprising that the default of that browser is to allow close tracking of user behavior. When you hit a website, a variety of trackers are logging your data for the purpose of serving you better ads. Some people don't like ads, and they don't like being tracked. But what's the alternative? How else can we get all the content we want? Since the 90s, engineers have envisioned an internet powered by micropayments. A micropayment system in your browser would allow users to pay for content with money instead of adtech. Brave is a web browser built with a modern view of advertising, privacy, and economics. Brave users can pay for content with their money or by paying attention to ads. This system is formalized through the basic attention token, a cryptocurrency that can be used to purchase user attention, which is essentially what advertisers want to do. Jonathan Sampson is a senior developer relations specialist with Brave Software, and he joins the show to talk about the problems with the modern browsing experience and what Brave is doing to stop it. If you like this episode, we've done several other shows about privacy, and we did a previous show about Brave and WebAssembly with Brendan Eich, who is the CEO of Brave. If you want to find these old episodes, you can download the Software Engineering Daily app for iOS. You can easily discover old episodes that might interest you and get recommendations based on what you have listened to so far. The app is open source. It's at github.com/softwareengineeringdaily, and if you want to contribute to it, we would love that. There's also several other apps you can contribute to. We've got a web front end. We've got an Android app that hopefully we will get out the door soon for you Android listeners. And we've got a backend recommendation system API. So this is an ecosystem that we're hoping to build out, and we would love to get your contribution if you like to hack on open source software. You can go to github.com/softwareengineeringdaily. And with that, let's get on with this episode. To build the kinds of things developers want to build today, they need better tools, super tools, like a database that'll grow as your business grows and is easy to manage. That's why Amazon Web Services built Amazon Aurora, a relational database engine that's compatible with MySQL or PostgreSQL, and provides up to 5 times the performance of standard MySQL on the same hardware. Amazon Aurora from AWS can scale up to millions of transactions per minute, automatically grow your storage up to 64 terabytes if need be, and replicate 6 copies of your data to 3 different availability zones. Amazon Aurora tolerates failures and even automatically fixes them and continually backs up your data to Amazon S3. And Amazon RDS fully manages it all, so you don't have to. If you're already using Amazon RDS for MySQL, you can migrate to Amazon Aurora with just a few clicks. So what you're getting here is up to 5 times better performance than MySQL with the security, availability, and reliability of a commercial database, all at 1/10 of the cost. No upfront charges, no commitments, and you only pay for what you use. Check out aurora.aws and start imagining what you can build with Amazon Aurora from AWS. That's aurora.aws, aurora.aws. Jonathan Sampson is a senior developer relations specialist with Brave Software. Jonathan, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. We had a show with Brendan Eich, who's the CEO of Brave, a while back, and it was really fascinating. In that show, we mostly focused on WebAssembly and the future of the web. In this episode, we're more talking about what Brave is doing on the browser platform. But before we get to the browser itself, let's talk about the state of the web as most people see it. What are the biggest problems with the modern web?
Well, you see kind of in the last, 6 years, 7 years or so, this gradual rise of ad blockers and stuff like that, because the web as itself has largely been free to many of us. We pay to get the access through our local ISP, but for the most part, we don't pay for many of the services and content that we consume on the web. And so those, content providers and creators, they've turned to fairly, decent models of advertising online, and it's been pretty nice for the most part. And I think Brendan has maybe mentioned in several podcasts how this was just an accident of the web as well, the way in which that ads and tracking and stuff has kind of proliferated over the years. But things have really gotten kind of out of hand, and so now you have ads that are coming packed with very burdensome scripts. Sometimes they have nefarious purposes. They're tracking you. They're tracking, many of them can be actually looking into your file system to figure out what type of programs you're running. And so this type of thing is just growing more and more out of control. And this is the very thing that various ad blockers have started to try and answer. Various people typically run those in their browser today, but Brave decided to go one step further and actually build a browser that is engineered to kind of restore quality to the web and free the user from the burden of these burdensome ads and trackers. And so that's what we're working on today.
Yeah, so I've been reporting on the fraud in the advertising business, the online advertising business, a lot.
Yeah.
And that's pretty disconcerting. The main victims of advertising fraud are actually the advertisers themselves, because they end up paying for display advertising that is only viewed by bots, or it's the reporting that the advertising agency or the ad tech company delivers back to the advertiser says, oh yeah, we showed it to this user, but in reality the display was hidden behind another ad. I've seen all kinds of scams like this. You're actually talking about the user side problems of this, where when ads actually get delivered to a user does see the ad, but the ad is an agent for malware or tracking, or it's not even like, you're not even getting really shown, buy this kind of soap or buy this cereal or buy this soft drink. It's like the advertising is just this third-party platform for brokering information and diving into the user's computer.
The issue is definitely multifaceted. There are issues that plague the end user. There are issues that plague the advertiser. There are issues that actually plague everyone and just across the spectrum. And so the first thing that Brave set out to do was build a browser which would kind of come to the aid of the end user, give them the ability to free themselves of what's happening. And so, as you mentioned, there are a lot of ads that are coming down, and sometimes the user doesn't even see them. In fact, a lot of the time, it's not even ads that are the problem. And so, if you look into, I think it was New York Times did a study where up to 50% of your mobile data was ads and trackers. So it may not even be something that you're seeing on your screen that is eating up your battery life, chewing through your data usage, and ultimately costing you, for most phone users, tens of dollars. I think it was about $23 or so a month on average for ads and trackers. And so the problem has gotten really out of hand on that side of the spectrum. But then, as you're pointing out, there's a lot of fraud, and there's a lot of people being hurt who are trying to conduct legitimate business and bring their products to market. And it's really something that we've been kind of looking at full spectrum. And so we launched the attention token, which is a way to kind of address the other end of the spectrum. For users who do want to engage in the ad market, how can we ensure that it's proper and fair and works equitably for everybody all across the board? And so that's definitely another area we're looking into, and that's on basicattentiontoken.org for anyone who wants more information about that particular side of the thing.
I'd love to get into the basic attention token a little bit later. Talking more about the modern web, most of the sites that I spend significant time on throughout the internet, they have their advertisements and their load times under control. I use Twitter, I use Facebook, I use Quora. there are many times when I'm browsing one of these walled gardens and I click on an external link, and it is kind of painful, that load time to the whatever the media site that's often hosted on WordPress, or perhaps it's usually it's a WordPress site. Usually it goes out to a WordPress site, but the WordPress site has all these ads and stuff in it, or it's some other CMS. Just it hasn't been engineered right, and the engineers have just put blobs and blobs of JavaScript that make it load slowly. But again, most of my time is spent on these walled gardens that keep the site pretty clean and performant. Do you see problems with those walled garden sites, or is the concern of the problematic ads ecosystem, does that mostly exist more across what we call like the open web, which is like these WordPress sites and these other CMSs and these news sites?
Well, that's, performance is one thing, and it's nice when sites have very performant, ad structures and everything. They're not actually bogging the page down. They're not causing it, to have any unnecessary jank to load ads and trackers. But at the end of the day, even if someone is loading bad code very efficiently, there's still a problem. And so we want to make sure that users are not being leveraged against their will, that they're not being pried upon, they're not having their machine scrutinized, if even done efficiently. And so there's that part of the problem where they're still doing some fairly nefarious things. They're still selling ads to outside agencies who are able to do some very terrible things as well. And then there's also the issue for advertisers. You have this giant duopoly forming where pretty much all of the ads online are handled through Google and through Facebook. And that causes other types of problems as well for people. And so, it's performance is definitely a very important thing, but that's just the facade of the issue. It's the very first layer that needs to be examined, and once that's examined and kind of done away with, there are still a few other considerations that need to be given always in this area.
The thing that excites me so much about Brave, well, one of the things is this notion that it will become much easier to do micropayments across the internet. And I think we're seeing a germ of how useful this is with Patreon. Patreon is this platform where you can subscribe to pay people on a regular basis to produce content, and it's really a promising sign that so many content producers are actually able to make a total living off of Patreon. And I think Brendan, who again is the CEO of Brave, I think when he was working on Netscape back in the day, he was one of the earliest engineers at Netscape, where he helped build JavaScript or architected JavaScript. I think they were trying to do something with micropayments, but they couldn't figure out how to make it work. Is that accurate? What's the history of micropayments in the browser?
I'm not actually positive about the Netscape days.
Okay.
Back then, the vast majority of online commerce, in my experience, and this was actually a few years later, about 96, 97, was largely PayPal. They had popped in kind of in parallel to eBay and stuff, and became the de facto standard for online payments and sending money around. But that is fascinating. I have to check with Brendan and see what exactly they're working on. But, as you mentioned today, you have this, people have been seeking out alternative ways to support content creators and maybe even more directly than just, through ads and stuff, where they only catch a very small percentage sometimes of the actual revenue itself. And the money gets sucked up in third-party players and that type of stuff. But the Patreon model is definitely very interesting. The ability to make continual routine donations to somebody for the work that they're doing. And that's definitely something that we liked in Brave, where, and this was kind of, juxtaposed with the fact that we were going to allow people to block ads and trackers. And that is for their safety, but at the same time, that may be a little overstepping than what they're comfortable with, and it may actually start to block, some good content on the web. There are some ads that are okay. For instance, first-party ads are generally more safe than third-party ads. And so we wanted to give people the ability to still support content creators and support their favorite websites while they're blocking potentially harmful ads that are coming through on those sites. And so Brave Payments was integrated into the browser, and this was initially based on Bitcoin, where we had partnered with the company, and you could purchase some Bitcoin in the browser, and we made it Very simple. You didn't have to explain the blockchain, didn't have to explain cryptocurrencies to anybody. You just took your card, you bought $5 worth of Bitcoin, and then you started browsing the web. And I think that was very key to the success of this model, was to make it very simple and straightforward, and familiar to people. And so, that whole platform is kind of shifting today to the attention token, which is going to give us far more power. And it's going to make there's quite a few improvements that are kind of outlined in the white paper on Attention Token's website, and more so. But the model itself is fantastic, letting the users go directly to the content providers and content producers, and that's exactly what we're going to kind of facilitate and foster moving forward.
People are used to using Safari, or more likely Chrome, perhaps Firefox. These are the browsers that people use. They all have plug-in platforms. Why do we need a new browser entirely to solve these kinds of issues that we've been discussing? For example, why do we need a browser instead of an ad blocker? Why do we need a browser to do payments instead of using Patreon to support those users for their payments?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a good question. It's one that pretty much everybody has when they hear, well, Brave does ad blocking, and then their initial response is, well, I have AdBlock Plus, so why do I need that? And it's a great question. The thing is, ads will get you 90% of the way there, but the ads are still dependent upon the underlying API system of the browser and what the browser is willing to permit the ads to do. And in the case of some companies, which make their bread and butter off of ads, there's kind of a conflict of interest there. Will they let you do everything you need to do moving forward, or will they restrict certain APIs and that type of stuff? And so by having control over the entire browser itself, from the core out to the externals, all the way up to the ad system, or the add-on system, we get to make any changes we see fit and necessary to kind of achieve our end goals. And so we just take one of the examples is, a lot of people don't like the presence, the growing presence of autoplay media on the web. And there wasn't really a great way to stop that inherently at the core. And so we went ahead and made some modifications to the Chromium engine itself inside Brave, so that we could prevent autoplay media from ruining your web experience as you just pop into a website. That's not something we'd be able to do as effectively if we were just an extension on top of the browser. And so by having that additional kind of reach into the core of the browser, we can definitely go leaps and bounds further than mere extensions can in all across the board.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that Brave is it's a fork of the Chromium browser, which is I think the core of Google's Chrome browser. What are the pros and cons of using Chromium as the basis to build a new browser on top of?
Well, so as many people know, Chrome is the number one browser on the web today. Not nearly as successful as IE was back in the 90s, but they're doing extremely well. And as a result, people kind of expect the web to work the way it works in the engine that they use, which theirs is called Blink. It is itself a derivation of the Chromium engine. And so the idea there is we want to achieve maximum web compatibility. We want the new browser to just start working out of the box for people to work the way they've always expected the web to work, so that they don't have a bunch of broken pages and other issues. And so, Chromium was kind of the default standard, or the de facto standard on the web, and so that's what we decided to move forward with. I think there might have been some early engineering efforts around trying to use, Firefox internals and build off of the work over there. But the decision was made to go ahead and proceed down with Chromium. And so what we wound up doing was forking Electron, which was itself a project to bring a native desktop experience, for applications built upon web technologies. So they use the V8 JavaScript engine, and they use the Blink engine from Chrome, and they let you build, seemingly native applications on the desktop from web technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so we decided to actually fork Electron, and today that became Muon. And so, we continue to build upon the efforts of many of the great engineers working in this space, and it's really a kind of a nice relationship. We get to inherit a lot of the great work they do as we discover bugs and features that need to be worked on in the browser and in the core engines. We can send those back upstream to the other projects, and so it's kind of that beautiful symbiotic relationship that we see in nature.
So Chrome eventually gets to reap some of the benefits of the engineering efforts of the Brave team.
If they're interested in pulling them in, we have sent them up to Electron in the past. For instance, when we find a bug in the Electron source code and stuff. But if we find an issue in Chromium as well, that is definitely something that we have the opportunity of floating up to them. And if it gets accepted, then it gets accepted. But I think we have more accepted pull requests from Electron than we do Chromium, to my knowledge, though. Which benefits other applications like Slack and Discord and stuff like that are working on those technologies.
Absolutely. Who do you use for log management? I want to tell you about Scalar, the first purpose-built log management tool on the market. Most tools on the market utilize text indexing search, and this is great for indexing a book, for example. But if you want to search logs at scale, fast, it breaks down. Scalar built their own database from scratch, and the system is fast. Most of the searches take less than a second. In fact, 99% of the queries execute in less than a second. That's why companies like OkCupid and Giphy and Career Builder use Scalar to build their log management systems. You can try it today, free, for 90 days if you go to the promo URL, which is softwareengineeringdaily.com/scalar, SCALYR. That's softwareengineeringdaily.com/scalar. Scalar was built by one of the founders of Writely, which is the company that became Google Docs. And if you know anything about Google Docs history, it was quite transformational when the product came out. This was a consumer-grade UI product that solved many distributed systems problems and had great scalability, which is why it turned into Google Docs. And so the founder of Writely is now turning his focus to log management. And it has the consumer-grade UI. It has the scalability that you would expect from somebody who built Google Docs. And you can use Scalar to monitor key metrics. You can use it to trigger alerts. It's got integration with PagerDuty. And it's really easy to use. It's really lightning fast. And you can get a free 90-day trial by signing up at softwareengineeringdaily.com/SCALYR. softwareengineeringdaily.com/scalar. And I really recommend trying it out. I've heard from multiple companies on the show that they use Scalar, and it's been a real differentiator for them. So check out Scalar, and thanks to Scalar for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. It's an interesting point that you use Electron to build off of. What does Electron satisfy that Chromium does not satisfy? I guess I'm interested in understanding the Venn diagram between Electron and Chromium.
So Electron is a superset, basically, of Chromium. It is Chromium, but it is also some additional bindings and stuff on top of it. And it's basically just a means by which any web developer, and I mean that literally, any web developer out there can build their own desktop application using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Whereas, with other various browsers, and I've worked on a couple in the past as well, or one in particular in the past, you have to learn a whole nother set of technologies in order to work on the UI, and you've got to be a C++ programmer, and you have to do quite a bit of other things to really be successful in working on that browser. With Brave, it is basically a super web page. So if anyone's running Brave right now and you pressed Shift F8, you would notice that it opens up familiar dev tools. What you're used to seeing if you're inside Chrome and you right click and go to inspect element, you'd actually see the dev tools for the DOM of the browser itself. And so Brave is a React JavaScript application using JSX instead of HTML. And it is letting us use all these familiar and time-tested technologies that have been operating websites and web applications for many years to actually build a browser itself. And that was something that made possible by the initial efforts of the Electron team.
Well, that's incredible. I didn't know that Brave used React at its core for the UI. This is somewhat of a tangent, but I'm sure you have been seeing the debates over the Apache license for React. So people are concerned because I think I'm not totally up to date on this, but Facebook chose not to give a very open licensing to React. And so there are some open source ideologues that are arguing that if you want your project to be safe from Facebook filing a lawsuit against you of some kind, you should not use React. Have you been following this at all?
I personally haven't. The vast majority of my focus is around engineering efforts, but that is, I'm certain if there is a discussion in that space that we have someone who's probably looking into that. So I'm not too concerned about it, but I definitely could find someone probably on the team that is thinking more along those lines than I am.
Okay. So Brave blocks ads by default, I believe. And I think in that process, it's sometimes you make a mistake in terms of what you block and what you prevent the page from loading. I know my AdBlock Plus occasionally, I go to a page and it's like the page doesn't load properly or like a fraction of the page loads. I'm like, oh, what's going on here? And I'm like, okay, disable AdBlock for this page, and then it actually works. So I know that like the ad blocking process is not perfect. What are the heuristics that Brave uses to block ads? Like for any HTML element, how do you know that that's an ad?
So there are a couple of different efforts in this space, typically around ad blocking. There are the network level heuristics where you're trying to infer based upon the request and the response if this is something that needs to be loaded on the user's machine. And then there's the DOM level, or that UI space that you're talking about, where you're examining and scrutinizing the actual document object model itself or the on-screen elements to say, okay, does this really need to be here? In particular, you might have a container for a banner that got blocked, and now the banner is just sitting there vacant and empty, and you might actually want to close those too. And so you have those aesthetic and those network level heuristics. And so at the high level, what Brave does is we typically block, it's more, in general, all third-party ads. So if you're on foo.com and something is trying to be loaded from bar.com, we typically block that. And so if you're loading first-party ads, you'll probably not see any interruption to your ad ecosystem at all, because we typically leave first-party ads alone. One of the things that we do, though, is the ad blocking that takes place in things like AdBlock Plus and some of the other ad blocking utilities, those operate off of public lists, and so we're able to consume the same lists themselves, and these lists are curated and maintained by the community. So there's a great deal of distributed effort and crowdsourcing that goes into this, and that's one of the levels as well that we take in consideration. We'll be scrutinizing the list and see if the URL that is serving the ad is a known offender, that they're serving something malicious, and then we can block based on that. We also do some other things where we might permit script to be loaded on the machine, but then we're going to scrutinize it as it's operating. And so another thing that you'll see in the ad ecosystem is fingerprinting, where particular ads want to track you specifically as you move around on the web. And so they want to learn as much information about you as possible. And one of those things that they can do is generate a unique hash from Canvas API or something like that. And so this digital fingerprinting takes place, and we look for those types of things as well, and we prevent them before they run. And that way you are not distinct from the rest of the traffic online, so that people can't track you particularly around the web. And so there's a couple different steps inside there. The application of publicly consumable lists, those network level heuristics, looking at the actual code in operation whenever it's running, or in execution rather, and blocking some of the malicious patterns that we typically see there as well.
Let's get into the basic attention token. Explain what the basic attention token is.
So as we were talking before, there's this entire ecosystem online of ads, and this is basically, it's the way the web works. And you can love it or hate it, but you can't really do anything about it. The way web operates on ads. But there's a great deal of fraud, as you mentioned before. There's a great deal of burdensome performance issues and invasive tracking in ads. And that is one of the space that Brave has kind of introduced the attention token, which is this attempt to reform this ad tech industry and make it good again, so that it's gotten kind of wayward a little bit. And so the attention token is a blockchain-based means by which we can ensure, better quality ads. We can ensure no leaking of user data whenever we're trying to match users to ads. And this is an entirely opt-in system, I should say, at the very beginning here. So this is not something that we're just going to turn on Brave and people will start seeing ads. But it's basically the effort to fix the evil ad tech online.
So if I'm someone with a basic attention token in my wallet, what can I do with that?
So ideally, it's going to continue to work the way Brave Payments has worked in the past, where you can just continue browsing. And let's say you have, 5 BATs or basic attention tokens in your wallet. And at the end of the month, we can say, okay, you've visited, these 40 websites. You spent this, this amount of time on each website. We'll actually break it down into percentages and stuff. And you can say, okay, I want to distribute, my monthly allowance of BATs to these sites proportional to the amount of time I spent on them. You could do that, or you could actually say, there's one site in particular I really love. I want to donate, 5 BAT to Wikipedia every month because I go to Wikipedia all the time. I want to make sure they always get 5 BAT every month. So you could actually set up a fixed amount recurring donation as well. You could actually, in addition to the regular monthly payment, you can make donations to websites as well and actually support people just out of the goodness of your heart because you want to. And so we're trying to really offset the dependence upon the old ad tech model and create something new that's sustainable and has legs and is going to run. And so in parallel to this, one of the things we're going to be doing with actually a new ad model is, and I mentioned this before, without having to leak information about users and user machines, is engage in local client-side machine learning. So actually being able to, inside the browser, examine where you go, what you look at, how you browse, and then do it in such a way that nobody knows. And that includes Brave software. We don't get access to any information from your browser as well. And this is great because it allows you to opt into an ad system that is going to be catered to your browsing needs, to your interests, and it's going to do so without leaking information about who you are, to the web itself, which is what happens today. And so it's definitely a very exciting model. We're making great strides. We released a roadmap, recently on the BAT website, basicattentiontoken.org, and people can go there and see basically what we're expecting to have accomplished and when we're expecting to have accomplished it.
What's the difference between paying for content with dollars through micropayments in the browser and paying for content with basic attention token?
There are, I guess, numerous differences, but one of the great things that I like about blockchain-based solutions, and that is, the BAT itself is based on, I believe it's the ERC20 token model standard, and one of the great things about this is it is nearly instantaneous transfer of, BATs in this case, and there's very little overhead. So we had set up before where you could purchase Bitcoin, and this was, requiring you to spend some of your money and stuff. We wound up noticing that the cost to purchase Bitcoin and such, that this cost was just going up exorbitantly because there are credit card processing fees and all this type of stuff. And it kind of gets out of hand. And so with BAT, you don't have to worry about making credit card transactions. You don't have to worry about, those happening every month. You don't have to worry about middleman, jacking up their prices. You just have this decentralized ledger, and I can now transfer, 5 BAT to Jeff, and I don't have to worry about paying a great deal of overhead. There are, obviously, if you're a minor in the community, not a minor as in you're underage, but if you're a minor as in someone who has a node on the network who's actually, performing the math work, there's a little bit of, added money in there for you. And, I'm not quite sure if we're going to have the same concept of gas that Ethereum has, but there's always different ways that people can make a little bit of extra money on the side. But, the appeal to me is we don't have the burden of the old system and the way in which it works. I don't have to worry about paying 3% or 5% or something like that in order to make simple transactions between me and one other individual.
The property of being able to make simple transactions without going to the credit card processing world or something like that, that makes complete sense. And I would love to have that in my browser to do micropayments without having this onerous transaction cost. Couldn't I do the same thing with... So I guess it's unclear to me why I can't do that with Ethereum or Bitcoin. I mean, I would think like if I sit down to Brave and I'm like, okay, I'm going to use Brave as my browser for the next 3 months. And so I'm just going to buy $30 in Ethereum or Bitcoin or Basic Attention Token. What's the difference between Basic Attention Token and the other two offerings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a more technical topic that I don't know that I would be the best person to discuss. And so all I could do is point people to our white paper. My focus again is generally on development in Brave, but I have a growing interest in the blockchain-based technologies, and that itself is something that is something that we get to control within the ad ecosystem. It's built specifically for reforming the ad tech industry. And so there's a lot of nuances and everything that would be outlined in the white paper that I don't know that I would be the best person to kind of cover that.
I sell podcast ads, and podcast ads are a weird commodity. Many of my potential customers are not actively looking for podcast ads, so I have to reach out to them with a cold email. This cold email process is what lots of people go through, whether they're marketing a software product, a newsletter, or an online course. I know there are a lot of people who are listening to this who are building some kind of new software product, and they're trying to figure out how to sell it. If you're building your own business, you have to learn to sell, and if you're going to sell, you have to learn to prospect. Prospecting is the process of gathering email addresses and sending messages to potential customers. Prospect.io is my favorite tool for prospecting. You can find email addresses of people at any company. You can find email addresses of users on LinkedIn. After you find those emails, you can use Prospect.io to manage your prospects and to send emails. You can see when somebody opens your prospecting email, and you can stop sending those emails when they have signaled that they're not interested. If you're building a product, you have to find customers to sell to. How do you find customers? By prospecting. I've tried a ton of prospecting tools. Prospect.io is my favorite. Prospect.io is offering Software Engineering Daily listeners 20% off your first 2 months. Just mention SE Daily to Prospect.io support after you sign up. And if you're selling something, try out Prospect.io. I hope you enjoy it. Well, I mean, just some hypothetical things based off of what you just said. Like, if I'm a publisher and there's an advertiser that wants to air an ad on my website, and the user, and I want to verify the user that viewed that ad, if I want to have an end-to-end vettable transaction system, then it would make sense to have a domain-specific blockchain for, even if it's just like the ledger of transactions is not just like the financial transaction that occurs, but it's also the attention transaction that occurs. Part of the problem that occurs with the current ad tech model is that there's a lot of middlemen, and when there's an impression that's going to be served to somebody, there might be 3 or 4 different players between the advertiser and the person who is seeing the ad, and the transactions, the middleman transactions between the person and the person and the advertiser who's trying to show the ad to that person. It's an opaque handoff of information from person A to person B, and in that opacity there is so much room for fraud. That's the problem. So I'm just riffing here. Maybe I should probably do another show about the basic attention token, but I can think of all kinds of applications that would help to bring transparency or even just standardization to a world that is very much unstandardized, or it's standardized only to the extent that it can exploit the advertiser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you're hitting the nail right on the head as well, because if anyone is kind of curious about that general model and some of the problems that the BAT aims to fix, there is a short 2-minute video or something like that on basicattentiontoken.org where Brendan Eich himself actually kind of sits down and talks very high level about the project and its goals and aims. And as you pointed out, there's just the system is unfortunately fraught with fraud and middleman, and it's pretty nasty when you start to peel back the covers and look at it. And so there's definitely a great deal of potential for BAT to do some serious good in that space, and we're very, very excited about moving forward with it.
This again might not be something you are sure about, but is there a role for the middlemen ad tech companies in the world that BAT and Brave are trying to create?
For middlemen, I'm not really quite sure. The idea behind a more simplified advertising model is you have the advertiser, you have the end user, you have the content producer, and it's just this simple, harmonious relationship, not burdened by a bunch of additional stuff sitting on the network.
Yes.
And so the idea is to kind of restore that simplicity and get away from the more complex thing that has grown out of that over the last decade or so. And so it's a great question. Advertising isn't my forte, but it's something I'm very much interested in. Obviously, it's a very close effort to the Brave project, and so I kind of watch with eager anticipation of it. I was sitting at a friend's house the other night, and he is a non-technical friend who happened to have stumbled onto a Bitcoin documentary, and he called me up at 1:15 a.m. in the morning or so, and it was like, you got to come over. I got to talk about blockchain. And so I went over to his house at 1:15, and we just sat there, talking about the blockchain itself and why it's so exciting. How this type of technology is really revolutionizing many older industries, not the least of which is the adtech industry. And so, the idea of having the stability and the accountability that comes with a pseudonymous blockchain is very winsome. It's very appealing. And so I'm definitely looking forward to continuing to watch the BAT mature and proliferate and kind of fix the web for everybody.
I think I saw your tweet about that. He wanted to meet you at IHOP or Waffle House or something.
Oh yeah,
talk about blockchain.
Yeah, this guy he's hardcore. If he can get you at a Waffle House at 2:30 in the morning to scratch out ideas on the back of a napkin, he will. And so we definitely all need to have a friend like that.
Of course, I think I have been that friend, and more than I've been on the. Anyway, so the tracking stuff. Tracking is one of these things where many times it's doing you a disservice. Sometimes it is doing you, positive service. So, like when I'm browsing the internet and, for example, Amazon is tracking me through the internet, and Amazon, it seems like, has really started to spend a lot of money on advertising online, because I know this because I'm seeing more and more display ads for Amazon, and it's like an item that does appeal to me, and it's kind of useful because I'm like, yeah, I actually kind of do want that, and I'm almost willing to click on an Amazon ad because I know it's just going to take me to Amazon, which is like, I'm not opposed to that. I don't have a negative affiliation with Amazon. And I'm just bringing this up as an example to illustrate that not all tracking is the worst. There is some tracking. There's a lot of tracking that's really terrible. And for all the complaints that people have about Google or Facebook surveilling you, at least these companies have a little bit more of a long-term interest in protecting your information. There are much sleazier players that you've never heard of that have as much information as they need to ruin your life as Facebook or Google does. But all of these companies want to track you through the internet. And, in some cases, like Amazon or Facebook or Google, there could be a lot of utility. Like, I think that, or maybe you can tell me to what degree Facebook or Google needs to track you through the internet in order for you to be able to authenticate with them. Because, when I authenticate, I enjoy authenticating with Google or authenticating with Facebook because it's a seamless experience. I don't have to enter my password a bazillion times. That seems like a positive. Does Google and Facebook need to track me through the internet in order for me to get that positive login experience?
I don't think so. I'll go with the first thing primarily. So the idea of tracking itself, I don't know that anyone likes tracking in principle. That is quite literally someone just stalking you around the web. I think we like what we sometimes get from the tracking, which is that more better targeted ads. And so we like the fact that, well, if you're walking behind me everywhere I go and you're observing everything I do, you're going to learn a great deal about me. But at the same time, I'm leaking a bunch of information to you, the advertiser, or to you, the person selling the ads. And so it's kind of, one step forward, two step back type of thing. And what we did at Brave is we're actually thinking, well, is there a way to have that targeting where you get the ads that you actually want without leaking all of that information about yourself, about where you go, about what you search for, about where you're purchasing things? Because this is hopped off of the web, and now large companies, I think Alphabet has access to a massive amount of credit card transactions or some meta information about credit card purchases at this point now, and they can basically tell what you're buying, where you're buying it, with your physical card in hand. And so, this whole thing kind of reminds me of that episode of The Office where Oscar was doing ads for abs, and he was watching some documentary on the phone, and anytime ads would come on, he would go and he would blast his abs. And the way that he actually did it was by hanging upside down from like a chin-up bar with these gravity boots or something, which he says he found through an ad themselves. So, ads brought him a product that he liked, but he also didn't want to continue to subject himself to ads and tracking online. And so I think that's what we're looking at, is how can we get the same benefits of that for people who want to have targeted ads without leaking that information. And that's one of the areas in which machine learning client side within your browser itself is going to be far more powerful and far more impactful than any malicious tracking or any of this I would say unethical tracking has ever been. Because machine learning is happening inside the browser. The browser knows so much more than what can be leaked out through cookies and that type of information. The browser knows how you scroll. The browser knows what you look at, where you're typing, how much what your behavioral characteristics are when you're interacting with the web. It knows what percentage of an ad is on screen, and it knows whether or not ads are occluded by other elements on the page, as you mentioned before. The browser itself is the oracle in this space, and it really could be leveraged for people who want to have better targeted ads to achieve that without having to share and overly divulge information about themselves to just out to anybody on the web, middlemen included.
I like the idea of the client-side machine learning. How much of that has been engineered at this point? Is the Brave team just thinking about that? Because I can imagine there would be an issue of, because you need a model, right? You're training a model over time, and if you're doing it client-side, I guess you wouldn't necessarily have to keep the model client-side. You could potentially have the model sitting in the cloud somewhere, and the model is somewhat opaque, and then you have new information that comes in and gets processed client-side, and you figure out how that new information would update the model, and you can update the model in the cloud, and you can do all that without actually sending the raw information back to Brave. Maybe you could just shed some more light on the engineering, or at least the intentions or the plans of the Brave team around that client-side machine learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the end goal is to do everything we can without leaking anything. That's currently the goal with what we have implemented today. The entire process of this machine learning development effort is laid out in the roadmap that was published on the basicattentiontoken.org. The first phase is actually already done. So you ask, what is the development process here? The first phase is actually already done, and that was, kind of finished in the Brave Payments feature that was launched in the browser quite a while back, which means that the browser actually has the ability to track where you're going and, how much time you spend on which sites, and do so without leaking that information out to anybody else. And then that in turn can translate into a micro donation at the end of the month or something like that. So this is going to continue to develop, and the actual expected steps are outlined in the roadmap itself. So you'll see we're going to start from just that primitive basic attention recording that we're doing right now. and moving forward to a finer, more granular process whereby we can actually track, okay, what types of ads are they interested in? Are they interacting with? How long are those ads on screen? Are they occluded by anything else? Are they visible? And it's going to get a lot better, a lot quicker, and it's going to be really fantastic. And so that's all laid out in the roadmap again, and that's actually coming very, very soon. That's going to see the next development of that.
From your point of view, how does WebAssembly affect the future of browsers?
The WebAssembly is actually really exciting because it starts to build bridges where they didn't previously exist. The idea that you can actually cross-compile languages to operate on the web. And I kind of expect to see that, pop up more and more in the future. I spoke last year about, do I expect JavaScript to cease to exist, basically, as we typically have written it, and WebAssembly just to take over? And I don't think that's the case. I think what we'll start to see are, especially in the area of like machine learning, that might be an area which is ripe for potential for some of these languages like C and C++ and stuff to actually cross-compile over into code that can actually run in the browser more efficiently and effectively than if someone had written it in JavaScript to begin with. And so as browsers continue to do more and more heavy lifting, things that require more and more power and processing, I think that is definitely an area that is ripe with great potential in that space.
Do you see any fundamental changes to the browser coming as computing becomes more about voice interfaces?
That's a really tough one. I'm really into VR. My son and I, we wanted to get an Oculus Rift, and so we purchased that, and he loves playing video games, and I love some of the productivity apps. And so there's an app on there called Big Screen, which lets you, basically use your desktop in a virtual space. The great thing is you can actually take your small 13, 15-inch screen and you can make it a 75-inch screen right in front of you, curved around your head. And it's amazing. The resolution is nice and everything. The problem is you can't see your keyboard. So, if your hands float off the home row or something, or you're trying to reach over for your numpad, you can't really do a whole lot. And so, they find ways to work around that by adding an on-screen keyboard and stuff that you can just, it's basically the, hunt and peck method where you have two sticks and you can just poke buttons on the keyboard. But the voice interface there is really interesting because that would be a natural extension of what we're already used to. Even as far back to, I think, the 90s, we had the Dragon Naturally Speaking software where you would sit down and train your computer to understand your voice. And Microsoft recently announced, I think, that they have their error rate down to 5% or something with speech recognition. And so it's getting better and better. And of course, with the advent and the growth of all of these digital assistants, with Cortana and the Echo, I have to be sure not to say the other word, otherwise I'll trigger my house.
Yes.
And but it is definitely a natural interface. And so I firmly expect to see, that continue to develop. It's already come quite a ways in the accessibility community. And so it seems only natural that it will continue to bleed over into the general community at large and develop there as well.
So totally unrelated to Brave, but how productive are you when you do the VR thing? Because this is what I kind of dream about is like, well, this... when I think about what would I actually want out of VR is like putting on a headset and having browsers, like being surrounded by browsers and being able to be productive without, just staring into this rectangle on my desk. But then the of course the downside is I'm fully immersed, and who knows what the health risks of that are.
Yeah, so far it's been pretty decent for me. I don't spend any more than maybe 30 minutes to an hour at a time in the VR headset. I'd say the biggest issue is just the lenses fogging up, and then you start to lose some of your visibility. There's also an issue of resolution. So, while I can use Brave in my VR headset for things like navigating GitHub, reading issues, closing issues, that kind of stuff, it's a little more difficult to use it for actual programming, going into Visual Studio Code and writing some JavaScript, for instance. Primarily because, as I mentioned before, you can't see your keyboard, and secondarily because the resolution is fairly low, and so it's more noticeable when you're looking at ligatures and characters on the screen and that type of stuff. It's less noticeable when you're looking at giant buttons or large paragraphs that have giant font sizes and that kind of thing. And so it's It's great. It's getting better. It's not quite there. The thing that I'm primarily interested in these days, I guess, would be the augmented reality space and looking at what like the HoloLens or something could do. And because those are actually able to project over what you can actually see. So you'll still be able to see your keyboard, still see your mouse, still see the microphone here before me. And you still get the benefit with the of having 1,000 screens all around you and spatially aware as to where you put them and where they're going to remain. And so I'm looking forward to that entire space. And that's definitely something that, I've been using Brave in the Oculus Rift, and our interest is there as well. Wherever you are, we want to be. And so Brave today is available on Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Android, iOS. And if there's an opportunity to have a virtual version of the browser that just operates in augmented reality or virtual reality, I think that's definitely something we'd explore as well.
Okay, well, just to wrap up, tell me about how the open source community interacts with Brave. Are there lots of contributors, or are most of the contributors from within Brave, the company?
Well, like with any open source project, so at Microsoft, we had some open source projects in the past. With Brave, we are largely entirely open source. I think we're actually entirely open source. I don't think there's anything that we have closed source. Google as well, they have open source technology, but with all these companies, they all have a paid staff, and that staff have become experts in their code base. They know where everything is. So generally, you're going to see this long tail of enumerated developers and how much they contribute to the project itself. So if you look at that first, the very front of that graph, there'd be quite a few people who contribute to Blink who are also employed by Google. At Microsoft, same people working on the Chakra engine are also going to be employed by Microsoft. And at Brave, the vast majority of the contributors who have, one or more contributions are going to be employed by Brave. That being said, we do have a very just awesome community. We have community.brave.com where engineers and laypersons can come and discuss the browser itself. We have tons of people who open issues on our behalf. They may not be, equipped to go and fix the problem, but they can at least open an issue for us on GitHub and let us know about it. We even have quite a few people who, if they continue to engage the team, we'll pull them into a Slack as well, so they can actually communicate more directly as if they were one of the team members themselves. But we have a really kind of beautiful community of developers who work with us and who continue to contribute in meaningful ways in the Brave browser itself. And not to mention a lot of people who they have great ideas and they just want to see if they can integrate it and get it working in Brave. And so we had, for instance, someone wanted to see if they could get WebTorrent working. And now we have the ability to interact with torrents in Brave itself. And so that's really exciting. It's built right in. We even have someone looking into the IPFS, or the Interplanetary File System, which is a decentralized way to serve websites and files as well. And, we're exploring whether or not that's something that can work inside Brave as well. And these are all just people in the community who have great ideas and they want to see if it's something that is feasible. And by and large, it usually is. And again, that goes back to our access to actually the Chromium source and being able to make whatever changes we want internally to accommodate those types of eccentric ideas and things that we want to see how we can push the browser even further.
Well, that's very exciting, Jonathan. Thanks for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you about Brave and the future of browsers.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure as well. Thank you for having me.
Thanks to Symphono for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Symphono is a custom engineering shop where senior engineers tackle big tech challenges while learning from each other. Check it out at symphono.com/sedaily. That's symphono.com/sedaily. Thanks to Symphono for being a sponsor of Software Engineering Daily for almost a year now. Your continued support allows us to deliver content to the listeners on a regular basis.
Wow!